Welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell. This is the place where we dive into the world of talent acquisition, explore the challenges of today's workplace, and discover what it takes to build a thriving and successful organization.
Welcome to my inaugural podcast. My guest this week is Sarah O'Hare, a visionary leader who is dedicated to advancing women in the workplace. As the global head of human resources at Freudenberg, a 174-year-old solutions company, Sarah has worked tirelessly to create a culture of inclusion that uplifts women at all levels of the organization. Sarah is a trailblazer in the corporate world, and we are honored to have her share her experience with us. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. I'm really excited to be here to discuss all of these important topics.
Wonderful. So to start off with, tell me a little bit about your journey rising in the ranks as a corporate businesswoman and the challenges that you faced.
You know, what's interesting is I never really saw a challenge. I think I was brought up to just go out, work hard, conquer your dreams, and be optimistic. So for me, I would say I didn't even recognize early in my career that there might be an issue in general, a systemic issue, a societal issue, maybe a cultural issue in some organizations. I didn't really experience it myself. That was my own self viewpoint. It took some time for me to recognize that maybe my experience was quite different and maybe a bit unusual, and that I would have to step in to help make a difference for others.
Gotcha. So if that was your experience, looking back, do you still feel the same way about that experience? Do you, while you may not have felt challenges as you were going through them, looking back, were there some, or really you were just fortunate that you didn't run into those kinds of obstacles?
I think there were times at which I started questioning maybe selected events, but I would say some of that wasn't connected to my gender. Sometimes working in a multinational corporation, I was looking at the influences of culture in different countries and whether being an American was making an impact. And yes, at times being a woman, whether or not that was making a difference in my interactions. I did recognize, but this was actually later in my career, that I was at a few top leadership programs that were very challenging, and they were meant to get you to dig deep into your experiences and how you show up as a leader. And I found when I became emotionally exhausted from these competitive environments that we're being placed into and videotaped, and evaluating our interactions, that I would find the 2 or 3 other women in the group just to relax a little bit. That was maybe something I found quite interesting.
Yeah, very good. And for the audience, just so they can get a better sense of who you are, can you give me just a brief synopsis of your career path from entering into the corporate world to where you are at today? How did that progression happen to becoming the leader that you are?
The short story is I'm an economics major that came out of school and went into consulting with Mercer, a very large consulting firm. I spent 5 years as a specialist in compensation practices and decided I couldn't be a great consultant if I hadn't lived in the shoes of the people that I was helping to consult for. So I got out. I went into banking as a compensation analyst, so a highly technical professional HR position. Banking was not something that appealed to me as much, that industry. And then I fell in love with manufacturing, going to a tier 1 automotive supplier, again, as a compensation expert. That's where I recognized if I really wanted to advance further, I would have to find a way to start expanding my experiences and broaden beyond compensation into other areas of HR. So I looked for those opportunities. I found my way to Freudenberg, and that's when my career really started accelerating, moving beyond compensation to benefits, labor relations, training, talent management, talent acquisition. And I found myself in a series of positions then inside Freudenberg, where I've now been since 1998, that have placed me in this position to wind up in what I would call my dream job as the global head of HR for a 12 billion euro group with over 50,000 employees in 60 countries. I mean, really something meaty, rewarding, and where I feel like I can really make a difference.
Yeah, and you have so many people you get to directly impact with policies, procedures, et cetera. So that's just fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You mentioned at the beginning there of this last question that you didn't necessarily feel some of the pressures because of your gender, but because of working for a multinational company. I had similar experience. Much of my background in corporate started in working for Japanese companies, and I felt very similar. Even though I'm fluent in Japanese, there was always some of that not quite belonging. How did you deal with that, or how do you deal with or help create awareness around various barriers in terms of diversity and inclusion, whether it's gender or otherwise?
For myself, sometimes I would have direct conversations with colleagues and ask, I'm looking at this project to proceed forward. I feel like we're coming up against some roadblocks. Is it something about my styling or how I'm presenting? Or is it, sometimes I would ask, is it a chemistry issue with us? I might even ask, I'm wondering if I'm getting this reaction because I'm American. Sometimes those conversations can go well. And other times, I think it makes other people bristle a bit. So you're not great at this, I would say, when you start doing it. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. It's a little bit of a subtle evolution, and you learn through experience. So for myself, while I didn't really feel the gender topics, I did feel being an American in a German company. Those, I think, are very elementary questions that you start asking yourself as you're trying to find your way and navigate your own career path. I mean, we go through extensive work now in Freudenberg to sensitize all of our associates that we're this multinational company. And so being culturally sensitive is part of our mantra. It's part of what we have in our guiding principles and what we expect from leadership and people in general. And so I would say leaning on those guiding principles, and Freudenberg really lives them. They aren't just 6 values on a plaque somewhere.
It's just not signs in the hallway.
No, they're not. They're not. And every 3 years, we invest a lot of money to talk via a survey questionnaire, 100 questionnaire to all 50,000, over 50,000 now employees about people and value for customer and responsibility and leadership. So I think that's maybe something I would share with you about Freudenberg.
Yeah, and maybe something that I think, our listeners could benefit from. It really is individualistic. I mean, there isn't one solution for everybody. We strive as we work with our companies to share and establish those cultural values, but literally every single person that you encounter or work with within the company or just, suppliers, customers, et cetera, I feel like you just have the more experience you have with an individual, the better you'll understand how to approach that. And there isn't a perfect answer every time.
Exactly. For me, there was a substantial turning point when it came to the gender diversity topic. And this is what was revolutionary for me. We have a particular top management meeting every 3 years where the top 300 or 400 people go. And I can remember going to my first event and the CEO stood up in front of everyone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there are 15 women here. We have to do better." Essentially, that's the short version.
It's fantastic.
And 3 years later, the same CEO got up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there are 15 women here and we have to do better." So here you have support from the top person in the organization, but the needle didn't move during those 3 years. And so now I'm looking at 6 years and I'm getting ready to go to the next top management meeting. I'm thinking, wow, this is how it happens. We're going to be coming up on a decade, and I'm not sure we moved the needle. Exactly. Yeah. And I started asking why. And I think that's something that maybe you've seen in your career, but I certainly saw in mine. And that is, if you don't put in specific initiatives, if you don't hold the conversations, if you don't set goals, if you don't have someone who holds the organization or themselves, frankly, accountable, a decade can go by. And then you start thinking, wow, I'm going to be close to retirement. We have children coming in, the next generation. And how am I going to leave? On what note do I want to leave? And that's when I think magical things can start happening.
So, one of the things that I encounter as I work in the electronics manufacturing space, I hear from many of the business leaders, there's a desire, but often I hear the rationale, the reason, the excuse, whatever word, depending on the individual and how much work they put into it, is there's just not enough of an insert diverse class here. It could be, race, gender, age, whatever it may be, available for our facility. We in a manufacturing facility, we can only hire people who are interested in applying. How do you approach that sort of concern or excuse when people say, hey, I just can't do it? I have a few ideas, but I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it depends on which job family we're talking about. For example, we had this conversation in the very early days when it came to women, because we're a technology-based organization and 75% of our employees are, let's just say, manufacturing and mechanical engineering engineers.
Sure.
Well, clearly, 50% of the graduating class in the United States, to use one country, is not female. So if you want to hit a certain target or set a specific goal, I do think you have to keep that in mind. It doesn't stop me from saying, okay, but what can we do? Yep. And where are we operating? And where are we recruiting? And are we going to the Women's Engineering Network? Maybe 50% isn't a reasonable goal for this country, in this market, in this space, but something better than where we are certainly is. And I really see that when you put focused effort on your talent acquisition team, for example, are we really getting a diverse slate of candidates? They might think they are, but when they really go to measure, when they're doing it organically, they recognized, wow, no, we have to do something actually a little more specific and different to go out. It's a little more work to find, fill in the blank, women, racial diversity candidates, something else.
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, really, it's. I feel like companies tend to get comfortable with what they've done historically, and one of my pet peeves is, well, that's how we've always done it. That phrase just drives me absolutely up the wall. But there is a sense of, well, this is how we've always found people, and if it's always how you've found people, and as you bring them in, you keep getting the same kind of people and you're looking to diversify that group, well, then you have to look at different ways of finding people and different groups, different avenues. And if you're not exploring those, and it's work to do something different, you don't have the system set up to do that automatically. But once you do, I mean, one of the things that I found, I don't know if you find this true, we're in a state where there's a very low percentage of unemployment. So finding people can be a challenge. And then as I hear this from individuals where they're saying, I just can't, I can't fill the positions I need. And yet if they're unwilling to go look into other pools of talent, then shame on them. By looking at different pools, it actually helps them fill these needs that they have that they're struggling with.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not easy work. And the United States has had, low unemployment levels for quite some time. And we do have challenges filling positions. I mean, just getting people in the door with, I think, 3.5% unemployment. So we recognize we're in a different space than maybe we were a decade ago. And it is harder. But that's okay. We like a challenge. And I'm sure a lot of the people listening to you like a challenge. And we recognize HR professionals are really under the gun because turnover is high in the United States. It's so much more than you might find in other countries like Germany, where it's 4.5 in depending on the industry, of course. But, we're at 20% here. That's not easy. I mean, you're continually having to fill the
You're always finding.
pipeline in exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned that now that you're looking at other individuals, let's focus on gender diversity here just for a minute. What advice would you give to women who are just starting their careers and hoping to advance into leadership positions? What are some of the things that they should be thinking about doing as they enter into the workplace and hope to move into, leadership positions?
For both men and women, but you asked about women. I would say you have to perform, you have to work hard, you have to want it. So all of those things are sort of just the entry ticket. But I would also say, don't be too cautious and don't be too slow at expressing your wishes for your career. Number one, I think you can make it happen. That's how I saw myself. I wanted something. I wanted the next thing, whatever that was, broadening or vertical. And I made sure that my boss knew about it or others who were in a position to influence. And I continually thought about how do I get that next set of experiences, even if it's not in my current job responsibility, so that I can keep adding to my toolkit and my portfolio. And so I think wanting it, being okay saying you want something, asking for support from people on how they might suggest you go about gaining those sets of experiences that make you qualified when the next opportunity comes up. I would say that's a differentiator. I interview a lot of top potential women, and one thing that I've noticed is that they're very pragmatic. They have to get A, B, C, and D experience before they feel comfortable enough to then apply for the next position. I'm not saying that's universally true. I'm just suggesting that women want to have more security and confidence that they have all the skill sets. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying women aren't confident, but they want to have the skill sets first before they go out and ask.
Yeah, and I've seen studies and talked with people where there is a tendency for women to want to make sure that all the boxes are ticked for the position to say, yes, I've qualified and I've done this. I've got the 5 years of experience. I've had this specific skill, what have you, before they feel like, okay, now that I have all this stuff, I can move forward and apply for this. Whereas I've seen, again, these are generalities, there's always individualism as it goes through it, but often men will just say, oh, I've started on that path, and they'll go and apply before they've achieved it. And sometimes that can be a differentiator. So I love your advice that if you know what you want, ask for it. You might get it earlier in your acquisition of the skills than you think, but at least then as you're communicating and talking with those who either are doing it or are hiring for it, they can help you understand, well, there's a shortcoming here, or, wow, you actually have 70% of this. That's good enough. Let's move you in here and gain the rest.
I love that you used a percentage, 70%, because one thing that I like to communicate is if you can do the job 100%, it's not a stretch, it's not a development opportunity. You don't want to be able to do it 100%. If it's less than 60, the risks get greater that you might not have as much success. But I think 80% is sort of the sweet spot. And I'd even stretch down to 70, which is the number that you just used. Mm-hmm. But that's exactly the mindset I would want everyone, women included, to have. And that's that you really want to be stretched at an assignment. And it's okay not to have everything. And your management team won't expect you to. They need to help develop you along. So yeah, really interesting what you see when you talk and coach and mentor women. And there are some amazing women out there.
For sure. So if those are the things that women can do, are there roles for men in helping to advance women in the workplace? How can they be allies to fight for gender diversity and inclusion?
Just by showing up. I mean, in our workforce, men are almost 70%. So it's critical that they are involved and that they are part of the efforts to move forward, that they know what we expect and what we're trying to achieve in the corporation. So whether it's something that they do daily in a management meeting where they're making sure all voices are heard at the table. And now I'm talking a little bit about inclusion, but I think those are things that men can do if they're in a position of authority or as a peer. It's making sure that all the voices at the table are heard, paying attention to what the organization wants to achieve, and I would say supporting the company philosophy that equal opportunities have to be just that, equal opportunities.
And I love that you say, that as you describe that, it's all the voices at the table. It's not specific voices or, let's make sure that there's a specific group that we haven't heard from. You just need to make sure that everybody's being heard. I had an experience in a board setting where about 2/3 of the board were Americans that were very, these are A types that spoke their minds and didn't mind interrupting somebody to stomp over them to make sure their point of view was heard. And then I had a few individuals who are from Asia that's just not the culture. And so, I was able to pause and say, okay, let's hear from so-and-so. And it wasn't about, not that we felt like we had to make it, but we're better for listening to all the various diverse views because it ends up providing us with better insight, better products, etc. Do you have similar experiences?
Yeah, there was a situation that I would share, and same sort of setting. The Western cultures really jump in, and sometimes if we're not careful, we can stifle all the voices. Sure. And it became very obvious. In this case, it was an Asian team as well, and there were a few that really they were pondering the topic and listening, and I'll just say being very polite. And so there was a pause, there was a stop, and there was a question to the colleagues who hadn't spoken. Hey, we really want to hear from you. And we asked them, what can we do to hear your views, your opinions, and have you share on this particular topic? And they talked amongst themselves and came back and said, you know what? When you want our input, can you just give us 1 or 2 minutes? We'll talk amongst ourselves in our own language, sort of gather our thoughts, and then we'll be able to participate a little more actively. I mean, the person running that session was on the ball. They saw it, and even in that case, I would say they were sort of like 2.0. They asked the group, what can we do to make this more successful?
Yeah, so it makes them comfortable in the way.
Yeah, very similar.
All right, hang on, Sarah. We have to stop here. But coming up in the second part of my talk with Sarah O'Hare, the global head of HR at Freudenberg, Sarah shares her hopes on the future of diversity.
I do think we have to have efforts. I want to see an environment, 10, 20, 30 years from now where both my daughter and my son feel like they can come and exceed at their given passion. And I think we're on our way.
This has been Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you want to empower your organization to reach new heights, go to johnwmitchell.com to find the techniques and tools you need to attract and retain the best team and boldly reimagine your workplace. Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell is a production of Forbes Books.